morning. Exodus chapter 18, the scripture on the screen is going to be the place where we're going to spend the most time this morning, so I encourage you to turn there. According to the New Oxford American Dictionary, burnout can be defined as physical or mental collapse caused by overwork or stress. And it seems like we don't have to look very far around us or maybe even into our own lives to see that overwork is something that Americans do a lot of. It seems like cramming our lives to the max is a point of pride, a measure of success, and sometimes we can even tell that in conversations that we have with each other. Sometimes I catch myself saying, in response to a, "Hey, how are you doing today?" I will say something like, "Oh, I'm just so busy doing this, doing that." Overwork is not a badge of honor. Chugging coffee out of desperation does not make you a worthwhile human, but sometimes we act like it is and does. But does God mean for us to live in a constant state of stress? I don't think any of us are aiming for a breakdown, mentally or physically, but are we living in such a way that we are robbed of our joy and our peace in the Lord? No doubt you, like me, have a long to-do list, and you have a lot of responsibilities, and you've got a lot of demands on your time. You've got a limited number of hours in your day, so how do we work in a healthy way? What should we change about our lives if we take a good hard look at them? I think this story in Exodus 18 is a very practical example of what God does with His servants when He sees them drifting too far into the realm of work in a non-productive way. And it's a good reminder of the life that we're headed towards in eternity because of what Jesus has accomplished on the cross to reverse the scripture that was just read for us in Genesis 3. "Thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you shall work, and by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread all the days of your life till you return to the dust." That's going to be reversed in Jesus Christ. And someday we're going to be working for Him in a way that is so unlike the temptations that we face here. So let's go to Exodus 18, and let's talk about how God rescued Moses from burnout. So if you would, please read with me, starting in verse 13 of Exodus 18. "The next day, Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, 'What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone? And all the people stand around you from morning till evening.' And Moses said to his father-in-law, 'Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and His laws.' Moses' father-in-law said to him, 'What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You're not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God, and you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide for themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you, you will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace.' So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law, and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. This is a fascinating interaction, conversation that we see displayed here. And so I just want to briefly work through it and summarize so that we're catching the meaning and we're pondering what is going on here between these two people. First of all, who is Jethro and what is he doing here in the camp? Well, if you go back to verse 1 of this chapter, you find out that Jethro is a Midianite priest who is also Moses' father-in-law, and so his daughter Zipporah before this time has married Moses, and they have a couple of kids now. And so Moses is being reunited with his family members. So we know from Exodus 4 that Zipporah and the kids went down with Moses when he went back to Egypt to go talk to the Pharaoh to start the Exodus. But at some point, she must have left with the kids because now they're being brought back to him, and Moses' father-in-law Jethro is the way that reuniting is happening here, that reconnection. And so Jethro gets a chance to get caught up on what happened in Egypt. Can you imagine sitting down with Moses himself being the one to tell that story? Well, Dad, we went in there and Pharaoh did this and said this and God did this and this and this, and pretty soon water was separating, and there was dry land, and the Egyptians died, and it was amazing. And so Jethro gets that story told to him by Moses himself, and he rejoices, and he acknowledges that, wow, God is greater than all of the gods because of what has happened. And then Jethro starts to get a sense of what camp life looks like for Moses. And so, can you imagine this scene? Jethro comes out of his tent in the morning. He's just gotten there. He is watching his son-in-law do his job. And so he watches Moses get on a chair, and he watches this massive line of Israelites, looking like a crazy Black Friday sale, come up to the chair, and it's out the door and wrapping around the camp. And Moses is there from morning till evening, the text says. And Jethro just keeps looking over, and he keeps thinking and thinking until finally he gets a chance to say this. What are you doing? Really? You're serving the people like this by yourself? How is this possible? Why are you doing this? And Moses has an immediate response for this. Moses is just caught up in the hamster wheel. He's probably not really thinking much about the details of his day and analyzing that. But he just says, well, this is my job. I'm the mediator for these people. Now, what's interesting is if you go back to chapter 17, we find out that Israel has just had a big battle with the Amalekites. They've defeated them. Maybe there's a lot of spoil now in the camp. Maybe there's some disputes and fighting about how do we divide up the booty that we've just collected for ourselves. I don't know if this chapter has anything to do with that or not. Maybe chapter 18 is just representative of the daily grind that Moses always had to deal with. I don't know. But regardless, this situation was serious enough that Jethro felt like he needed to intervene in some kind of way. But from Moses' perspective, he's the only one that can do this. I mean, if you go to Numbers 12, he's the only one that has very intimate personal contact with God. God says in Numbers 12, I don't speak to Moses like I speak to anybody. I speak to him face to face, mouth to mouth, like a man speaks to his friends. If the people want to find out about God's wishes, they go to Moses for that. By the way, this is a chapter before the Mount Sinai story begins, where the law is being given, God comes down, all the laws are given out to the people. Chapter 18 is before all that. They don't have the law yet, at least not in a big public way. And so if people want to find out what to do in their lives, they've got to go to Moses. Can you relate to Moses' response here? Has anybody ever told you, man, you just need to slow down? You just need to not work so hard like you're doing. You ever have a response like, well, who else is going to do this? I mean, this is I'm the one trained for this. I'm the one put in this position. You're telling me who else is going to accomplish these tasks if I slow down? You tell me that. I mean, sometimes we might think that way. To Moses' credit, he doesn't have a snappy response, but he just simply says, well, this is where I am right now. Right? And Jethro is not going to let him off the mat, though. He responds with, well, you just can't keep going in this. This isn't sustainable. You've got to take my advice and get some help. This is a not good situation from a lot of angles. It is exhausting for Moses personally to spend all day long trying to hear people's complaints and hard decisions or easy decisions and to try to sift through that and to give his judgment about that. I don't do that all day, but with 6 kids, sometimes those disputes get brought before a parent, and the parent has to adjudicate that situation. But I don't even do that all day and all night, but like Moses is doing here. So this is grueling for him. This doesn't give him other opportunities to rest or do other productive things, but it's also frustrating for the people because there's a lot of people, and there's only one Moses. So this is really inefficient in the way that this is happening here. And so maybe some disputes didn't get resolved for a long time, or maybe not at all because of the situation. And so it's interesting how Jethro advises Moses. He says, it's a good thing what you're doing. It's a good thing you're judging the people. It's a good thing that you're teaching God's statutes and laws. You need to keep doing that. But it is possible to do good things in the wrong way, like we see happening here. And so Jethro advises him, appoint some extra judges to help you with this. So if Moses arranged for people to handle the cases that weren't that difficult, then his workload is going to be much, much easier. And the people would have other people to hear them out. And Moses wouldn't need to work himself to death. So this is a win-win situation all the way around. Notice, by the way, as a side note, the main qualifications for these extra judges. He doesn't say they need to be super, super smart people. He doesn't say they need to have the best Harvard education. They need to have a whole lot of extra life experience. He says they need to be good men. And if they're men of character, if they're going to not take bribes, if they're not going to be bought off, if they honor and respect God, then those are the kinds of guys you should appoint. So when we're looking for men to shepherd us, when we're looking for godly wisdom amongst us, those are the kinds of people that we look for, men who are good. So as a result, in verse 24, Moses, it says, listened to what his father-in-law said, and he did alter his methods. Now, I think it is implied by the text that Moses must have brought this plan to God. He would not. This is God's camp. This is not Moses' camp. And so if things are going to be changed in big ways, that's God's decision and not Moses' decision. It's interesting, verse 23. Look back at that verse. Now, the ESV doesn't say this, but most of the other translations that I checked say something like, if you do this thing and God so commands you, then you'll be able to endure. So ultimately, this was the decision of God, but I think it's implied that God gave his approval for that because verse 25 picks up and says Moses started appointing these guys. And we find out in Deuteronomy 1 that actually what Moses did was he didn't pick all the guys himself. He put it out there to the camp and he said, you guys can select these people who fit this kind of qualification. And so they did. And that's pretty similar to what happened in Acts 6. The apostles find out about a problem in the Jerusalem church and they put it out there to everybody in the group and say, okay, you pick out these guys. And so that happened. And this crisis was averted. Now, what can we learn from this? There's the conversation, there's what happened. I want to think in terms of some questions that we need to ask ourselves as we think about our own lives and we think about the pace of life that we live at. Are we adjusting the way that we live for a sustainable pace? Or are we simply looking forward to future breaks? You know what Jethro didn't say? Moses, what you really need is just a good long vacation. The Persian Gulf is really lovely this time of year. And so you need to take a month off, or 2 or 3, or whatever you need. You need to get away, and then when you come back, you can go 90 miles an hour again, because that's gonna sustain you. A vacation wasn't an option for Moses, like it is for us Americans. Usually, your employer gives you several weeks for that. But I was actually thinking about this the other day. I can't think of a story other than Mount Sinai, where he's going up the mountain, where Moses ever leaves the camp. Can you? Maybe if you can tell me about that after we're done here, because that was kind of an eye-opener moment to me. Because he's Exodus leader for 40 years, and he doesn't take a vacation. But isn't it tempting for us to chase the illusion that stopping work is the answer? And somehow that's got to happen. And so next year, I'll go on that trip, and that's what's going to recharge my batteries to go back here and do everything that I've been doing before that's not actually working very well. A lot of you know that Jenny and I just took a vacation to Hawaii, of all places, to go see my youngest sister get married over there. She wanted a destination wedding. It was a fun trip. It's beautiful over there. We got to see a sea turtle. We got to see Pearl Harbor, so the history nerd in me was happy about that. We got to do some fun things, but 7 days, and it's done. And you get on a plane, and you get on another plane, and you eventually find yourself back here in normal life again, and the vacation's done. So since we know vacations are very temporary, sometimes what we do is we look forward to those future breaks farther beyond. And we might say to ourselves, well, yeah, right now is crazy, but one day I'll be an empty nester. One day the kids will all be out of the house, and then my life can just slow down several notches. Or someday I'm going to retire. And I'm just going to be crazy until that day when I can finally turn in my badge and go hit the golf course for the rest of my life. And then my life is going to be less crazy. Instead of looking toward the next break in our workload, we need to change the way that we work now so that it becomes more restful. Hard work is not a bad thing in and of itself. I mean, we Adam and Eve, Genesis 2, were put in the garden to work it and keep it. We were designed for work. And so just ceasing work is not really what God has in mind either. We just need to change the way that we do it. And so that is what's happening here. Jethro did say, the work you're doing is valuable. The people do need a mediator. They do need a teacher, but don't do this by yourself. You and I only have so much energy, only so much time in the day. And so don't do what I do sometimes and just complain that you don't have more than 24 hours or more energy than you do. We need to be more thoughtful about how we use our limited resources. And so if we're working to such an extent that we are not tuned into the lives of our spiritual family members, something needs to change. And if we are working to such an extent that we're not connected very closely with the physical family members that we have, something needs to change as well. And I tell you, that's a challenge for preachers, just speaking personally, because our work hours are really flexible. And there is always, always, always more to do. Always. I'll tell you just very personally, one aspect of how this hits me, this hits my work, this hits my family. Because of my work, I'm not always available after dinner. Because I might be teaching a study in the evening, I might be meeting with somebody, because when other people are available to meet with me, it's often after their work hours. So I'll try to make arrangements for that when I need to, and so I'm not always available in the evenings. So what I've said to Jenny is I'm going to try to give 4:45 as my stopping point for my work day, because if I'm going to spend time with the kids during a day, it's going to be in that time window right after my work before we start dinner, because after dinner we immediately go into clean up house, clean up kitchen, bedtime routine, the whole 9 yards. And then maybe I'm gone after that. But I'll tell you, there are a lot of days, too many, where I hit 4:45 and I look at my to-do list and I think, I am just not at the part of my day where I wanted to be. And so I'm just going to work 10 more minutes, just 10 more minutes. And then 10 more minutes goes by. Okay, another 10 more minutes. And then before I know it, I have completely lost my time window of opportunity to spend concentrated time with my children or my wife or both. That should not be. That should not be. Because I don't get that time back. And you don't either. So a sustainable pace is going to look different for you. I mean, I'm just talking about my family there. I'm not imposing my standards in that time slot on you. You're going to have to work that out with your own schedule in what makes sense for your family. But it probably involves setting some kind of boundaries and then sticking to those boundaries. And so maybe that means using your off hours more efficiently than you have before. Maybe that means restructuring work hours, taking different shifts or less shifts. And I know that with some jobs, there's just only so much wiggle room to be had with those things. And so if that's not possible, maybe it's time to think more seriously about a more drastic change, a change of job, a change of career. Whatever it does mean for you, in your life, in your family, we need to have the courage and discipline to do something different when it's necessary. So this is a question to think seriously about. Second question I want to ask is, are we permitting responsible, godly people to shoulder some of our load? Because that is exactly what's happening here. Can you imagine how lonely Moses must have been before Jethro comes in and these judges are appointed? Can you imagine doing that job morning to night and how stressful that would be, and then laying your head on the pillow in your tent and thinking to yourself, I'm the only one who knows what this feels like? I don't know, maybe he didn't have time to think about it. Maybe he didn't go through that thought process, but that's probably what I would do in his shoes. And so when he did appoint these judges, that decreased his workload, and it also meant now he had kindred spirits who did understand what he was going through because they were doing the same thing that he was doing. And so part of the built-in blessing of a local congregation, such as we have here, is that we have people who have our backs, even though we don't all necessarily exactly understand what we're all dealing with. For example, I don't know what it's like to own my own business and all of the stresses that go into that, but Keith and Laura do. I don't know what it feels like to work at a 911 call center like Brent does. I don't know what it feels like to work in the county jail system like Mickey does. But if you explain your situation to me using language that I can understand, layman terms, I can take your situation to God. And I can ask God to lighten your load in some way. I can ask Him to help you in whatever way that you need help with. Because I know some of you are working in understaffed, highly stressful situations. And I want to pose this question to ask you, are you sharing some of that load with us? It doesn't necessarily have to be with me, although I'm happy to hear about what stress you have. But are you sharing that with somebody? Because that's what we are here for. So when you have an especially hard week coming up, when you have a brutal deadline hanging over you like a battle axe, ready to chop your head off, that's something that you can tell people about if you are weary and heavy laden and you're not sure how to get through that. Remember Galatians 6 verse 2 says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. I think the context of that verse is talking about the burdens of sin, because that's the verse before that, Galatians 6:1. But surely that applies broadly to all kinds of burdens that we share. And you remember in this context that we just read, Jethro says, you need to appoint these guys that they may share some of the burden with you. He says that. So are we taking advantage of helpers, like we should? Are we delegating tasks when we can, like Moses did here? When a fellow Christian sees you drowning, and they can see how hard you're working, and they can see how stressful it is, and they say, hey, let me take some of that off your plate and put it on mine. Do we let them do that? Sometimes if you're me, you think about an offer like that, and you think about the other person, and you think, well, you've got your own plate. You've got your own pile of responsibilities too. That's going to be a huge sacrifice for you to come do this for me, but helping others inherently involves sacrifice to one degree or another. So we do need to be thoughtful and wise and not just take advantage of everybody around us. About how we receive help, we need to be thoughtful about that, but we also need to give others the opportunity to help us when they can tell that we need help. Or we need to have the humility to go to them, even if they haven't offered, and say, can you help me in such and such a way? And then finally, are we humbly allowing a fresh pair of eyes to look at our situation and give advice? Maybe at this point in this sermon, you're thinking about these previous points and you're saying, well, yeah, sure, that looks great on paper. But for one thing, I am so tired that I don't even know what to ask people to pray for. I don't even know what I can ask other people to take off of my plate. That's why this point is so crucial. Other people who are not living in your shoes can sometimes see things about your life and my life that we cannot see clearly ourselves because we're just living in the hamster wheel. And I think that's the situation with Moses here. Don't you think it's interesting that when Jethro comes and talks about it, Moses doesn't say, you're totally right, and we had a council about that the other day, and we're trying to put these things in place. We've got a plan for that. No, there was no plan. There was no plan. Jethro comes, and Moses just kind of throws up his hands and says, well, that's the way that it is. When we read this story, I think it's pretty obvious to us that Moses can't keep living this way. But it's not really obvious to Moses at the time. He needed another pair of eyes. And so we do too. And sometimes that advice is going to be unsolicited. Did you notice here that Moses doesn't ask for his father-in-law's advice? Jethro just gives it. How would you take that? Can you imagine that? Your father-in-law comes into town and he watches you do your job for one day. One day. And at the end of that one day, he pulls you aside and says, okay, son, let me tell you what. You got to change this. And here's how I think you should change it. You really should do. How would you take that? Moses in Numbers 12 is called the meekest man on the face of the earth. And I think this is one of those stories that shows how humble he really is. Because he takes this unsolicited advice, he digests it, and he then applies it. He didn't say, okay, Dad, when I want you to comment on my life, I will tell you that I want advice. He accepts it because he knows the value of wise counsel. Do we know that? Proverbs 24, verse 6, by wise guidance you can wage your war. In the abundance of counselors there is victory. Titus 2, older women are told to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children. Shepherds in a local church in Hebrews 13 are described as men who keep watch over souls as those who will give an account. Part of that keeping watch involves intimate association with the rest of us, and then guidance and advice when the shepherds can see that we need help in some way. Keeping watch over a flock doesn't just mean the shepherd just stands there and watches the sheep. No matter what the sheep do, no matter where the sheep go, the shepherd's just going to stand there and just say, oh, there they are. Shepherds are hands-on. That's what a shepherd does. Do we want our shepherds to be hands-on with us? See, not being one of the shepherds, I can say this to the congregation in a way that they can't say it because I'm sort of the middleman here. But I want to just invite us to think about that. Shepherds, do you guys want to be hands-on? And us as sheep, do we want to receive this kind of help? Do we want fresh pairs of eyes? I want to end thinking about Jesus here. At the beginning of the sermon, I talked about how Jesus defeats what Genesis 3 talks about. Remember in, come on, point. There we go. Remember in Genesis 3, Adam is told that thorns and thistles shall grow from the ground as a curse in your work because of your sin. We are not able to create a paradise on earth for ourselves. And I'm not in any way suggesting in this sermon that we can. No matter what you tweak about your job, about your life, about your work, it is always going to be true of us in the time under the sun that we're going to have thorns and thistles. Because in Romans 8, we are told that we are going to groan inwardly as we await our adoption as sons, the hope of glory that we have, the redemption of our bodies. And so there are ways to make our work less thorny and less thistly, and we do need to take advantage of those things, but ultimately, it's only Jesus who's going to completely minimize our stress. He is the ultimate solution to burnout. Because what else is said in Genesis 3? He shall bruise your head, but you shall bruise his heel. So serving Jesus, the conqueror of the devil and of sin and of death, that is the real answer to burdensome work now under the sun. We have pictures like that in Revelation chapter 7, verse 15. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve Him day and night in His temple. I believe that heaven is going to involve some sort of work. You know, the picture of us floating around on clouds, strumming harps with halos on our heads is inaccurate. It's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible presents a picture of We're going to be with Him. We're going to be praising Him. And we're going to be working alongside of Him, with Him, under His supervision in a way that brings Him honor and glory. And that work is going to be perfect. I think that's foreshadowed here in Exodus 18. Did you notice verse 23 again? Exodus 18:23. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. What place? What's the place of peace? Well, for them, it was Canaan. For them, it was the promised land that had been talked about to their forefathers that they were heading into. But I think this foreshadows the greater peace that we are promised when we go to God forever in our new bodies and are with Him working in eternity. There's a comfort in knowing that that's our destiny. Yes, in the meantime, we need to tweak things, but we're headed to this place, this stage of life that knows no end, where we will rejoice without pain of any kind. So this morning, I invite you to think about your life. If you are outside of Jesus Christ, you are currently not headed for this stage, but He can alter your course this morning if you put Him on in baptism, having believed that He is the Christ, repentant of your sins, confess that He is the Messiah. We can help you with that. Or if you are a disciple, but you know that you are not following Him in the way that you should because you are overtaken by the culture of this world that teaches you need to go 90 miles an hour until you break into smithereens. Let us help you with that. Let us pray for you. Let's encourage you. If you need help this morning, let us know. Let's together we stand and sing the invitation song.